All right, and welcome back to Saturday Night Chit Chat. And wow, I'm super excited and honored to have this next guest on. I've been lucky enough to be able to do some things with him over the last few years, and asked him if he would join us on the show. He's got such an amazing story. A lot of questions that I think I know some, but a lot of them I don't know. So I'm excited to actually ask him a lot of these questions. Everybody, please, here at Saturday Night Chit Chat, please welcome Mr. Gerald Veasley. How you doing tonight, Gerald?
Great, FREEKBASS. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm so excited to speak with you and get a chance to talk. And I can't wait to hear what you have to ask me.
Oh, well, man, there's gonna be a lot. But well, you know what? One thing is really cool, and I think you and I are kind of in common like this. You know, you've been pretty much a Philly guy your whole life. I've been kind of a Cincinnati guy my whole life. I mean, we've both done a ton of touring and stuff, but kind of planted our flag in each one of our particular districts where we come from. So, I mean, you were born in Philly, right? And you know, that's where you're at now, right?
Philly has been home, and except for a few errant years in New Jersey,
Okay.
I've been a born and bred Philadelphian. And as you mentioned, it's a great music town, as is Cincinnati.
Right.
And I have to say, man, Cincinnati and just Ohio in general, I mean, so much great music is that people aren't even aware of. So many great bands that came out of your region. And same thing with Philadelphia. People know Philly International, but you know, there are many jazz artists that came out of Philly too. Like Coltrane spent many of his formative years here, as did Nina Simone, as did Dizzy Gillespie. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I'm happy to have grown up here because it's been a vibrant scene in many genres, whether it's jazz or gospel or R&B. So, and I still have a thriving career here.
That's incredible. Speaking of Nina Simone, have you got a chance to see the Summer of Love, the Questlove, the concert film yet?
I just saw it, and man, it was just mind blowing. I love culturally the statement that it makes,
right?
And I love that it kind of it reminds us of the history that we're living in now, to not take it for granted.
Yeah,
and to really write, because that Summer of Soul movie, it had the footage had lingered or languished for 50 years.
Right.
And that was a story that needed to be told. And you wonder how many others are there, including the time that we're in right now. So that's another great reason to celebrate what you're doing in terms of documenting all of your guests and their work, because we're living in a monumental time right now.
Yeah, it's wild too, because, you know, the show started right at the beginning of the pandemic, right in March of 2020. And it's weird, you know, when I go back and kind of watch some of the older interviews, you know, how the questions have kind of changed depending on what was happening, you know, which we'll get into a little bit of that as we go on too as well. So, born in Philly. Now, this is one of those questions I'm surprised I don't know this, but I don't. Was bass your first instrument?
Yeah, bass was my first instrument. Oddly enough, I had a cousin who I grew up with, almost like brother and sister, and I had been wanting an instrument for as long as I can remember. And finally, I got a bass for Christmas at the age of 12.
Nice.
But because of my little cousin, you know, they wanted to make her feel part of the whole thing, so they bought her a guitar. And she wasn't interested in that guitar at all.
Right.
So in the beginning, I was really playing both. And I still have this love of guitar, and actually, you know, spent a little bit of time studying classical guitar, and you know, I still love guitarists and guitar music, even though bass is my voice.
Right.
So an interesting kind of quick note about that is that even my first music teacher was actually a guitar player who was teaching bassists.
Right.
So when I started playing, you know, back in, you know, the late 60s, the bass was still an instrument. I won't say it was a new instrument, but a lot of the thinking around the bass guitar was that it's sort of a toy version of the acoustic bass, the upright bass.
Right.
So many of the teachers were taking upright technique and teaching it on electric bass.
Right.
But my teacher was a guitar player, so his whole approach was very different. So even in the way he taught me scales and positions, except for, and I did play with a pick.
I was going to ask you about that. Did he teach you initially with a pick? Yeah.
Yeah, I did, but I didn't take to the pick naturally. I was more of a finger guy.
Yeah.
But even so, to this day, my approach to the bass is thinking of it as a bass guitar, not as an electrified upright or contrabass.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, speaking of the picking stuff, is one person, I don't know if you've ever had her at the school or not, or you've talked about it, but is one person always fascinates me that was doing it during that 60s time period was Carol Kay.
Carol Kay.
Oh my gosh. Her picking technique is insane on the bass, you know.
And she's a wonderful guitarist too.
Well, and that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, she's a wonderful guitarist, and actually has a book, a guitar method book, like a jazz book.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's great. Again, it didn't come naturally to me. So even when I played classical guitar, that felt normal.
Oh, because of the finger thing, right?
Because of the finger. Yeah.
Wow. And then when you got into like high school and so you said what, like 12ish when you kind of started playing bass?
Yeah, started at the age of 12, yeah.
And then like when your high school years, did you do like, you know, were you playing like in high school bands and, you know, whether it be rock, jazz, you know, funk, whatever, you know, R&B, what was happening during those
Yeah, I think you kind of I think you're sensing it. Because, you know, growing up in the inner city of Philadelphia, we didn't have garages, so they weren't garage bands.
Right.
They were basement bands.
Sure.
And in every neighborhood, just about in Philadelphia, there was one or two bands. I mean, all throughout this city, bands were like springing up. First of all, we were all inspired by what we were seeing on television. You know, whether it was the British invasion of seeing the Stones and seeing the Beatles, or seeing the kind of funky bands, the horn bands like Mandrill, later on Earth, Wind and Fire, Chicago Tower of Power. Yeah. So everybody was super excited and had these bands, or Santana, which I think early on had to be like one of my favorite bands of all time.
Sure.
And so yeah, we were playing everything, and a lot of the bands were very versatile in their set lists. And I'll say this too, radio during that time was very much of a melting pot, and it wasn't as regimented or segmented as radio is now. So our what would now be called our urban station, WDAS, back then, they would play all those artists that I'm talking about. So they would play, you know, some Grand Funk Railroad and play some Mandrill and play Otis Redding.
Right.
And Santana without that sort of kind of egg carton way of programming music. And I think it was a healthy environment for aspiring musicians too, because you wanted to keep up and you wanted to absorb, like, you know, Deep Purple and everybody.
Right. And then how did you start, like, where did the jazz, like, did you just start kind of segueing into jazz, or were you kind of doing that simultaneously? Because I mean, most people now think of you as more of a jazz player, and so where did that love affair kind of start happening?
So I grew up hearing a lot of jazz around the house. You know, my parents and my aunts and uncles, they loved gospel on Sundays we listened to. Yeah. And, you know, on Saturday nights you heard, you know, R&B, and sprinkled in during the week you heard jazz. So I would hear Miles Davis records and Hank Mobley records and Wes Montgomery. Yeah. And so it kind of was part of my soundtrack growing up. So I always liked it. I didn't really understand how you did that music. Right. All right, but I liked it, and I had an affinity toward it. And so in my band that I'm talking about now and by the way, by the time I was 13, I already had a band. Oh. You know, because that's what you did. You know, you got guys together, and we played our first gig at the age of 13. That's great. And so as band members would check out new albums, you would sort of start to try some of that stuff. And I'll never forget the guitar player. He invited me over to his house to listen to a Cannonball Adderley record. Oh, right. And I was like, oh man, I can. So, you know, those kind of records, you know, you can feel the R&B or soul influence more appropriately. Of course. And you could kind of try that. Yeah. And so it was really an introduction of like being able to experiment with music that you didn't quite understand, but it resonated with you. And I would
Mm-hmm.
say the pinnacle moment was hearing Miles Davis' Bitches Brew,
Of course.
because that music was so, how can I put it? It was so, first of all, sonically, it was so interesting.
Right.
And secondly, you had these grooves and you had this music that felt organic and
Yeah.
like it was being made in the moment, like our jams in our basement, except you had this, you know, this, the greatest musicians of our time,
Right.
really just um, uh, trying to make music that, you know, of course it had some structure, but it felt so free to me. And so
Yeah.
those were the first records, those Miles Electric records that I could play along with and say, oh man, I'm kind of at least touching jazz a little bit. And then later on, I got serious, you know, and studying and so on.
And then obviously after high school, then you started, I'm assuming, gigging more and more around the Philly area, and that's kind of started getting your name around, like, you know, from playing with different networking
Yeah,
that way,
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah. It's interesting. That's exactly my path. Except the only thing I'll throw in there is that I had decided to not be a professional musician when I went to college. First of all, I didn't know musicians who had gone that route. Like I didn't know anybody who had gone to Berkeley or who had gone to
Right.
University of Miami. I just didn't know because I knew these other kinds of players who just had bands
Yeah.
and who were self-taught. And so I didn't know what the other path was. So I did pretty well in my high school, and I attended University of Pennsylvania, and my dream was to be a lawyer. I would say dream, but yeah, it was a dream, kind of.
Yeah.
Not a dream in the way I want to be a lawyer, but like imagining what I could do with my life.
Yeah. Sure.
And I just, the bass was in the closet. I didn't even pick up the bass.
Oh wow.
For that time that I was there. And then in my junior year, my father passed away, and I unexpectedly, and I really didn't know how to really deal with it. I got very quiet and silent, and I was grieving. But now having to grow up and be the man of the family and all those things, I didn't know how to do any of that.
Right.
And so I kind of retreated. And then the only thing that brought me out of it was listening to music. And it wasn't even intentional. I put an album on.
Yeah.
I remember, it was a Marvin Gaye album. And it didn't even matter what the song was about, but just something in it just opened me up all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And I just felt better. And I was thinking, yeah, that's what music's for.
Right. Right.
You know, because before that, music was fun, right?
Right.
It's a way to impress people.
Sure.
It's a way to, you know, get girls to be interested in you.
Right.
It's a way to kind of have a good time with your buddies.
Yeah.
But now I understood that's just a sliver of what music can do. Like it can heal broken hearts, right? And so when that happened, it was an awakening, because I said, wow, if that does that for me, what would it be like if I was on the other side of making music that could serve people?
That's why,
you know, who are just experiencing what I experienced.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided to become a professional musician. And I kind of landed in a band that was a really interesting band that people still kind of remember to this day. It was a fusion band called Reverie. And what was nice is it was a 4-piece band with keyboards, saxophone and drums and bass. And what was interesting about that experience is that it was the first time I was a band where everybody wrote music.
Oh, right.
We were influenced by mostly Weather Report, but also a lot of the other fusion things that we were hearing. And then
Return to Forever, that kind of stuff.
Return to Forever, right, and some of the ECM stuff.
Yeah.
And so we got a chance to grow and playing original music instead of covers, right?
Right.
Going to clubs and playing our own music. So that was very affirming. And
Phil, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Philly, like the Philly crowds and stuff were receptive to what you guys were doing on that vibe too? Oh,
absolutely. We had a really strong following and made albums and all that. And then other folks heard me, like the saxophonist Odin Pope, who took me to Europe, and I recorded albums with him. And the violinist John Blake, same thing. I toured with him, and working with him, he introduced me to McCoy Tyner, and I did a couple of tours with McCoy Tyner on electric bass, with playing straight ahead. And so that's the kind of, as you know, that's the kind of industry that we're in. It's like you do some good work here and someone hears you, and then they give you a chance to enter into their sphere. And you do some good work there and people start to hear about you, and that's been the blessing.
And that's kind of how, you know, ultimately you ended up hooking up with Joe Zawinul too. Same kind of vibe, just from gigging with other folks and you're getting your name around.
Yeah, very much so. Zawinul I had come to his attention. It's weird. 3 different people told him about me who weren't related to who weren't in contact with each other.
Yeah.
And then finally he heard me on someone else's recording.
Oh, wow.
Cornell Rogers is this drummer and I who used to have a band, and he had gotten chosen for Joe's first syndicate band. And he had me play on a song he was submitting to Joe. And Joe listened to the song. He was like, okay, it's a good song, but who's the bass player?
Oh, wow.
Right? And then I was, at that time also, I had just started working with Grover Washington Jr.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Who was another kind of the same thing we're talking about, like people hearing you and recommending you.
Yeah.
And I was playing the Greek Theater in LA, and with Grover Washington Jr. and Scott Henderson came to check out the show and also to meet me and take me to Joe's house in Malibu.
Oh.
So after the show, we hop in his car, we drive out to Malibu. He says, how you doing? Come on in. You know, I plug in my bass in his music room. And he doesn't pull out any music. He just starts grooving on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe he might have turned on like a drum machine or something like that.
Right.
Scott starts playing and I'm playing. And it felt like the most natural thing in the world. That was my audition.
Wow. Did you know you were auditioning at that point, or did you just think you were jamming?
I kind of knew, but I didn't feel that. That's a great question, because I didn't feel the pressure, right?
Right,
because
right.
You just identified something. Like, I wonder if I thought I was like, this is my chance.
Right.
What my attitude would have been.
Yeah.
But no, for me, it was like, first of all, you know how this is, right? When you're looking at your heroes, whether it's magazines or those days, like albums or CDs, and you're transfixed on these people.
Yeah.
You don't really imagine that you'll ever be in the room with them.
Right.
But if you ever get that chance,
oh yeah,
you know that it's going to be something special, or you hope that it's going to be something special.
Yeah.
So I had, you know, loved Weather Report music since the Miroslav Vitous days.
Sure.
So there was, organically, I think I understood his vibe.
Yeah.
And so it felt natural.
Right.
Just to play with them, you know.
That's how, when I first met Bootsy, it was like that, you know. It was you know, he was like this, you know, godlike figure almost, you know. And then we hooked up, and when I played, he was actually engineering and producing a session I was playing on.
Oh, wow.
And that, someone had brought me in. It was for this label over in Japan called P-Vine Records, which is like a funk label over in Japan. So I was just, and I think the way he actually connected with me, like, it was this groove, and I didn't play busy at all. I almost went the other way. I played super simple, and I think that almost is, you know, I'm sure like he was probably so used to bass players getting around him and just being like, oh, check me out, and I almost went the other direction with it and just played locked, you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of where that little connection went, you know, from that type of thing. So,
you know, we gotta talk some more about Bootsy, because, man, to have that kind of connection with really one of our most individual, idiosyncratic, special bass players, right, that America's ever produced.
Oh yeah.
You have to say, like, this, he created something that's, right, that we had never seen before, right?
Yeah.
Even when he was with James Brown.
Yeah.
Like, look at this lanky kid. What is he playing?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I can imagine what that's like, and so I don't know if you have any stories about this, but sometimes it can go the opposite way, right? Where you meet your hero, and it's a little bit of a letdown.
Right, of course.
Because people are just people.
Right.
And they're not always warm, and they're not always as inviting. And I had an experience like that too. Wasn't a musician, but it was someone who I really revered as a singer.
Oh, okay.
And I met her, and she was not nice at all. But then I understood something. I said, well, I wanted something more from her when I met her, because she had performed a song. My wife and I, we lost a a baby girl in our 8th month of our pregnancy.
Oh man, that's tough.
And there was this song that the singer had done, and it just connected with me, and it helped me. Remember, I just told you a moment ago about the power of music to kind of, and so that one song kind of did that for me again. And then I met this singer, and it was in a professional setting with other musicians, like all together. It wasn't like any fans around. It was a bunch of musicians. And when this meeting was over, I went over and talked to her about what the song meant for me. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads. She wasn't warm and fuzzy at all. And I was very disappointed. But then I thought about it. I was like, wait a minute. I wanted more. She already gave me what she needed to give in the song. Right? And so I think we have to kind of understand that, you know, sometimes the people that we really admire, we want that personal something, a validation or communication or that personal touch. That's extra. They've already given you their heart, in the music. Now, the other side of it, I mean, you might have stories about this too, having to be kind to people who admire us. Yeah,
that's true.
You know?
Well, and now, especially with social media and the way that, you know, you say the wrong, like, you know, I'm always second guessing myself even in an answer to someone on social, because, you know, when you read someone's text or you're typing something, sometimes it doesn't come off the way you meant it to come off, you know? And so you got to always be super, super careful with that, you know, nowadays, you know? So.
It's a responsibility in a way. Because and then having been on that other side, I know how important it is to, you know, to be courteous and to be kind.
Well, and the encouragement thing too, you know, I went to one of those when I was a kid, to one of the, you know, the Jamie Aebersold, you know, jazz clinic things, and Rufus Reed, who I'm sure you're familiar with, he was the teacher there, and he was just, you know, I just started playing upright, didn't really know what I was doing because I was an electric guy, and then I was just, you know, making it through, and by, you know, the end of the whole week, he was just so encouraging and just kind of set my path, you know, like I might have, you know, he was one of those people that really like gave me the confidence to feel like, oh, maybe I can actually really do this, you know, and he's, you know, I actually wrote him, a couple years ago, and I was like, hey, you probably don't remember me. People know me as FREEKBASS, yada, yada, yada. And he got back to me, and he maybe it seemed like 30 minutes later and just said, oh, so good to hear from you. And it was really nice to do that, you know, because you're such an early impression on my life, for sure.
Yeah, those things are super important, especially when you're younger, because, you know, we have all these doubts. We may not even express them.
Yeah.
But there's something that being a musician, especially to pursue the calling of being a musician, it's not a clear path.
Yeah, that's for sure.
There's no guarantees.
Right.
And we don't live in a society that really respects art.
Right.
We do to a certain extent, but not really commensurate with the value that it gives to society. And therefore, musicians and artists and dancers and painters, you know, unless you're really, really a badass, you have that in the back of your mind, like, can I really do this, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then a Rufus Reed comes along and says, man, you got it. Or in my case, it was Larry Coryell.
Oh, nice.
I was playing a show with Reverie. We did some shows where it was, we would play a set opening up for him, but he was playing solo guitar. And after this run, I said, do you have any advice for me? And he said something really basic. He said, oh man, you got it. But the way he said it, I received it as though he really meant it. Like he wasn't, you know what I meant? Like,
right. It wasn't just blowing you off. It was like,
he wasn't just blowing me off. And I said, man, yeah, I do. Yeah. Doesn't mean I figured it all out. Right. But that there's a germ of something in there that I could build on, whatever that is. So yeah, those people are out here who can encourage, and that's what I try to do too with young people, is encourage them, you know.
Well, let's segue that. This is a perfect segue into how and why. And for those that are watching that might not know, Gerald has this amazing, it's called Gerald Veasley's Bass Boot Camp, which I remember hearing about for years before I ended up connecting with him on it and doing some stuff there. And it's like, I've done a lot of these bass master classes in all different parts of the country and the world, and his is like nothing else. It's very, very special. The way that he has the teachers going from, you start from begin. There's a couple people I taught in there that literally got their bass like the day before, and not exaggerating. So you go from that level to a very advanced level, and everybody's very respectful of each other. So you've created this incredible environment there. So where did where was the I'm assuming a lot of the stuff you're already talking about, but what was the idea and inspiration to kind of start this camp?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I got to say this. I don't know if you know this, but after every camp, we do surveys at the end of the camp. And we asked, like, who was your inspiring instructor and who taught you things and who that you really going to stick with you. And your surveys were through the roof.
Oh,
I'm not saying that just because we're here, but you got some of the highest surveys in terms of people respecting your teaching ability and your knowledge. And because your listeners already know that you can groove your butt off, you're funky, you write great songs, great videos, and all of that.
Yeah.
But you're who you are as an educator. I'm proud to be able to say to folks who are tuning in that you are among the very best in being able to communicate with, like, these players you were describing, like from very, very beginners to advanced, and giving folks practical information.
Well, I
solid theoretical information.
Well, I geek out on it. I'm sure you're the same way. When someone wants to pick up and play bass, I'm like, that is so yay. You know what I mean? So I'm almost excited as they are getting them. Like, I'm like so excited to see, because then you can start, we can all talk that same language with each other, and that's exciting. You know what I mean? So
it is. Well, I'm getting way off from where your question is, but I think I don't want to overlook the fact that you are a great player and a great teacher.
Oh, thank you.
And often it could be one or the other, right?
Right.
Because it's hard to communicate sometimes in a way to make someone understand how to improve their playing, right?
Right, that's true.
It's a little tricky, but you've figured it out, and so that's great. The way I got interested in the bass boot camp was working on a project that we thought was, okay, let's just try it. A few things happened all around the same time. Ariana Kapp, who you know well now.
Yeah.
Ariana Kapp was in a program over in Austria, and I got invited by this gentleman by the name of Helmut Schönleitner, and he has this thing called Akusteier. It is like a cultural organization in Austria, in this little town. And what he does is he has guest artists come over and work with these young students, high school students, on all instruments. Yeah. But before you come over, you send your music. And then the students come up with arrangements. And then you coach them, right? It's a great concept.
Wow, that is a great concept.
So I went over there, I think it was either 4 or 5 days. And the biggest takeaway from that experience was seeing how people could grow musically in 4 or 5 days if you give them the right kind of information and encouragement.
Yeah.
And then previous to that, I had taught at the University of the Arts, and I taught at the University of the Arts for about 20 years, teaching bass students and coaching some ensembles. And usually in that setting, you have 13 weeks to see people develop, right? In a semester.
Yeah.
But that was the first time that I thought, well, wow, wait a minute. You can turn some light bulbs off in this condensed period if you have the right environment, right? And if some things happen that are just beyond academia.
Yeah.
And so I really thought hard about what those things were. And I realized that there's an inspirational element, right? Where you can make revolutionary progress. So most of what we think about when we're getting better is we think about the evolutionary process, which is exactly the right focus, that it takes time to develop.
Yeah.
But the danger is that if you're not getting at certain points, if you're not getting information to almost give you a jump start or to reinvigorate you, you can kind of flatline for years until you quit.
Yeah.
Right? The plateau, right?
Yeah.
So somebody's been playing, let's say 4 or 5 years, they're playing in bands, things are great. And then there's that moment where you get stuck.
Yeah.
You feel like you're not growing. That's the moment when most people quit.
Right. Yeah.
Or they just go along, plodding along for years.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll find something else to get them a jump start to go further and to try some new things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I realized the bass boot camp could be. It could be like those 2 paddles on the chest.
Yeah.
Now, around the same time, maybe a couple months later, one of my students came to me and said, man, I just got back from Victor Wooten's Bass Nature Camp.
Sure.
And he described all the wonderful things he experienced. I was talking to him and his mother.
Yeah.
And they talked about the atmosphere and how Victor was just so encouraging and in his own way kind of jump-started their imagination to not even have them thinking about bass, but thinking about life.
Yeah.
And I said, that's it. That's what we can do for bass players, but instead of it being, you know, an environment in the wilderness, we could do it in an urban environment, and it'll be different, but we can certainly encourage people. We can certainly give people new ways to think about their music. We can get people off of their plateaus. Mm-hmm. And it's mainly about setting a psychological and spiritual and social environment for magic to happen. And you can almost just get out of the way in a way and do it if you set the right environment. So Lee Patterson, who is a dear friend, and Roxanne, my wife, the 3 of us, we sat around a kitchen table and we dreamed up this idea of this intense weekend. And
what year are we talking about? Like, how long ago was this first one?
This was, it was in 2002.
Wow. So that the first year was 2002?
2002.
Wow. I didn't realize it was going, I knew it would be going on for a bit. I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah. And 2000.
So you're going on almost 20 years now. You're going
years, yeah. 2001 is when we first started talking about, in the fall of 2001. Wow. And then we launched it in March of 2002. And we did it in conjunction with the Berks Jazz Fest. Oh. Because I'd already had an association with the Berks Jazz Fest. And I thought, well, what would it be like if we actually took people not just to an environment in an urban setting, but put them in this space where there's all this music happening around, and actually use some instructors who are playing at some of the shows and enable students to get inspired by watching shows of great bass players. So that's how everything kind of came together. And then the what you witnessed and what you took part in is sort of an extension of that thinking of really a basic way of thinking about teaching, which is number 1, everybody's a student and everybody's a teacher. That's one of our first fundamental things, is that all of the teachers, we're all learning and growing. We're not finished. We're still growing, and that we can learn from our students and we can learn from each other. So that's part of the environment thing. And that way, and that the students can all teach each other. Yeah. And the second thing was to acknowledge that there's a limitation on how much information someone can absorb in a weekend. We offer about 30 hours of instruction. If you were to take every class and every jam session or whatever, it would be about 30 hours. Right. But and it's a lot of information, and most of that information people will be working on for a year or 2.
Has it always been like, have you had the same concept where it's in like, currently for, again, people that might not know, Gerald has it in like one central location, which in this case, it's like a Sheraton hotel, right? Kind of in downtownish Philly. And you're just, that's the camp. You're there camped out, whether you're in the room coming down to it's great. I love it. I think it's great. It's very conducive to just constant learning the whole time. And, I mean, was it like that from the beginning, or did you have a different setup when it first kind of kicked off?
Yeah, initially we presented at Albright College, which is
Okay.
one of the private colleges in the Reading, Pennsylvania area where Berkshire Jazz Fest is.
Yeah.
And then we would, after the day sessions, we would go to the Holiday Inn at that time.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. And then eventually we had a conflict with the college in terms of they had an event that they couldn't reschedule, and we really wanted that particular weekend.
Right.
And so we said, well, what happens if we just put it in a hotel?
Yeah.
So we took it to a Crown Plaza there. And what was cool was that then we could use the ballrooms and we could have classes throughout the day. And the weird thing that happened that year was that when the day's classes ended, there was so much energy that students were still getting together and jamming in the lobby.
Oh, right.
At like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, midnight. And we said,
Yeah.
okay, that's great, except
Right.
that's not conducive to the hotel business.
Right.
So then what we started doing was we said, well, let's take advantage of that energy and have nighttime classes in ballrooms. So that's where the night owl classes started.
Oh,
We started having classes at midnight only to satisfy this pent-up energy that people had. They weren't done learning.
Right.
And so create jam sessions at night, or other kinds of classes on, tone with pedals, or any kind of tapping, anything that's a little bit different, or classes even on sight reading at midnight.
Wow.
So what we've done is try to follow the energy of the students. They kind of have helped create the camp over all these years, tell us what the camp needs to be.
And then how far into, or how many years into it when you got the boot camp also has, it's usually I think always on the Saturday afternoon, they have kind of like almost like a mini NAMM show, but just bass centric NAMM show. Was that something from the beginning, or was that something that kind of evolved as you went on with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Ibanez was our first sponsor.
Yeah.
Because I'm an Ibanez guy, I would dare say I've been, out of all the bass players, I've probably been with them the longest, and we've had a great relationship. And when we started the camp, they were all in and supporting us. But we were not real aggressive and going after sponsors.
Yeah.
Because I always wanted the camp to be about learning.
Yeah.
And I had in my mind this sort of want to have a division between the business of selling basses and strings and amps, and the idea that we want people to be inspired by music.
Yeah.
But then over time, I realized that people are not just gearheads for the sake of getting gear, but that there's a lot that we can learn from all of these wonderful luthiers and manufacturers who themselves are artistic in what they do.
Right.
Sure. And especially a lot of the smaller companies, that they became part of what we do, not just in the business sense, but I started thinking, well, what can they offer to inspire musicians?
Yeah.
Right? And so that was sort of how the expo was born. It was like, and especially going to the NAMM show, which is this, for your viewers who have never been, it's like if you can, I don't even know what analogy, but if like,
it's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for musicians.
Yeah, exactly.
And, it's almost too much,
It's almost too much, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if you can imagine like 10 super Walmarts of just musical instruments and people playing, and all your favorite players, and just on steroids.
Yeah.
But for a lot of the smaller companies, they don't necessarily have the profile or the platform that the large companies do.
Right.
And so I would go around to the smaller manufacturers and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this event that's really geared towards the, some of the luthiers who are making these great handmade instruments, and the people who are doing innovative stuff in electronics and pedals and amplifiers. Would you be interested? And many of them were really excited about it. So that's how that was born. Just this idea that those innovative manufacturers, that they're helping us create inspiring music, and that the ones who are the smaller businesses are doing some of the more innovative stuff. And if you have an expo, you know, it's one thing to see something online or see it in a magazine, but to hold a Federa bass in your hand, or you know, or just you actually plug into a Mark bass, or you know, a Epiphany, you know, to actually experience it.
Yep.
That's another level.
That's great. That's great. Well, hey, that's kind of get close to wrapping things up. And I'll close with this. Where do you, and this is like one of those questions that has evolved since the show began, obviously. And it's kind of even changing even weekly, the world we're in right now. But, you know, with live music, where do you, you know, where do you think we're at with live music? I mean, is 2022 just going to be 2019 all over again, you know, or is it going to be, do you know, feel, and I know there's a lot of factors that neither you or I know because a lot of things can change. But just, you know, what's your general vibe? You know, things are starting to open up now, obviously, and some shows are starting to happen. What's your feeling moving forward with live music?
Yeah, I think we're opening up, and I think we have an institutional memory about how bad it was when we were not open. So I think many of us are really vigilant about doing all we can to remain open.
Yeah.
Some of it's not within our control, right?
Right.
So I'm vaccinated.
Yeah.
I always felt like the vaccination would be a shot in the arm for us in the arts.
Yeah.
That it's hard for us to do what we do without people who are sitting close to one another.
Right.
Because of the emotional experience, it's a social experience, and from a business standpoint, it's a business of volume.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless we can figure out a way to charge people $1,000 per concert, you just get, you know, few of them, 50 people, unless we figure that out. Because even the virtual experience, I think in the beginning people were very forgiving because they just wanted it. Yeah. But now I see it because we produce concerts every week at a place called South in Philadelphia, where I bring in artists, and we've presented over 300 nights of music. And now we're seeing people who are out for the first time, and they're saying things like, "Oh my God, this is my therapy. I needed this. Yeah. I'm so glad to be back." Yeah. So this is not to say that things cannot close up again. Yeah. But I think if it were to happen, I think the consequences would be more dire than we can imagine, and not just from a business standpoint. Right. I think from an emotional, social aspect, it would be really damaging. Yeah. So I think, you know, it's a great question, and I think, like, to the extent that we can as artists, we have to spread the word to encourage people to, let's just try to keep moving forward. Yeah. Yeah. And then real quickly, and with this, what do you you know, say the next 6 months to a year, what do you have, you know, on the docket, you know, whether it be, you know, recordings you're doing, shows you're doing, of course, bass boot camp, all the above. Yeah. Yeah. So I've been collaborating with this wonderful singer, Carol Riddick, one of the most angelic, beautiful, soulful voices. And she's also a powerhouse. And for a few years, we've been channeling the music of Nina Simone. You asked about the Summer of Soul. So we do a project, and we're about 2/3 of the way finished an album, recording. So my plan is to get that out in the early part of 2022 and tour that record, because it's you know, I grew up. You asked about, like, or I told you about my introduction to music and how it meant so much to me. I also grew up in a time where, you know, music had this other kind of intent to change the world, that the message was super important. And so Nina Simone is just one example of that energy. And so we want to be part of that too, of reclaiming this power that music has. So that's our vessel to do that. Well, and you said you're going to go out and do some live dates with that too? Absolutely, as well? Yeah. We're going to tour with that as well. Yeah. That's amazing. Cool. And then obviously boot camp, you got, you know, the first reschedule one coming up at the first week of September, right? Is that right? Yeah, Labor Day weekend. Labor Day weekend. Yeah. And are there still slots open if people are interested? There are still slots left open at bassbootcamp.com. Well, I'll make sure that that's linked. We'll have that linked in the show thing too as well. So that's very great. Cool.
Awesome. Well, Gerald, I can't I mean, I could talk to you all night long. you know,
Same
so,
here, man. I'm
yeah,
a
yeah.
fan and I love what you do.
Oh
And this
man.
is just an extension of all the great artistry that you have and your passion for music.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And I can't thank you enough. I'm super excited to see you in person in September. That's going to be so much fun. And yeah, let's just keep pushing that ball. I'm excited. Yeah.
That's it.
So, all right, man. Well, thanks for being on tonight. And I will see you very soon. Take care of
See you
yourself.
soon. Thank you.
Bye bye.